The folder hit the dining room table so hard that the cutlery rattled against the china. Daria Lennox Whitmore, 36 years old, director of the Whitmore Family Trust and wife of Conrad Whitmore, did not flinch. She had learned not to flinch. After 11 years of marriage to a man who treated every room like a boardroom, she had learned to stand very still and wait for the storm to spend itself. Conrad Whitmore, 42 years old, chief operating officer of Folktale Capital Partners, stood at the head of the table with his jaw tight and his eyes bright in that particular way she had come to recognize. Not anger exactly, but calculation wearing anger's face. "You had no right," he said. "Going through my office, going through my files." Daria looked at the folder. It had landed open, and even from where she stood she could see her own name on the top sheet. Her name, her signature, and a date she did not remember signing anything. "I wasn't going through your files," she said quietly. "I was looking for the insurance renewal documents, the ones you said you'd handle 3 months ago and never did. That's not what this is about." "Then tell me what it's about, Conrad." He didn't answer. He picked up the folder, closed it, and tucked it under his arm as if the conversation were already finished. That was another thing she had learned about him over 11 years, the way he ended discussions by simply refusing to continue them. She used to mistake it for confidence. Now she understood it was control. Their housekeeper, a quiet woman named Mrs. Farrow who had worked for the Whitmore family since before Daria arrived in this house, appeared in the doorway with a look on her face that said she had heard everything and would never say so. Conrad walked past her without acknowledgement. A moment later, the front door closed. Daria stood alone in the dining room with the rattled cutlery and the chandelier light and 11 years pressing down on her like weather. She had not planned any of what came next. That was the thing she would want people to understand later when people asked. She had not set out to uncover anything. She had only been trying to find an insurance document. The Whitmore house in Rosedale sat behind a wrought iron gate on a street so quiet you could hear the seasons change. Daria had moved into it as a 25-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life working for other people's causes and had no idea what to do with so much space. She remembered standing in the front first night as a married couple and thinking, "I will make this warm. I will fill it with something." She had filled it with work. The Whitmore Family Trust had been her idea, built from a charitable endowment that Conrad's grandmother had left in a half-organized state when she died. Daria had spent 4 years turning it into something real, a functioning organization that funded early childhood literacy programs in underserved communities across Ontario. She had hired the staff, written the grant structures, built the partnerships with the school board. She had done it because it mattered to her, but also she could see now, because it gave her somewhere to put herself when Conrad made it clear that he did not particularly want her present in other parts of his life. She was not naive. She had understood somewhere below the level of conscious thought that the marriage had calcified into a kind of arrangement. She stayed in her lane. He stayed in his. They appeared together at the right dinners and the right charity events, and they were considered by the people who considered these things to be a very suitable couple. What she had not fully understood was what was happening in the lane she was not supposed to enter. The document she found 3 days after the dining room incident was not in Conrad's office. It was in the filing cabinet in the mudroom, tucked behind the house warranty records and the receipts for the snowblower. A single sheet of paper that appeared to be a wire transfer confirmation made out to a numbered company she did not recognize for an amount that made her sit down on the mudroom floor with her coat still on, $430,000. Transferred from an account she had never seen before, an account in the name of the Whitmore Family Trust. Daria knew the trust's accounts. She had built the trust's accounts. This was not one of them. She sat on that mudroom floor for a long time. The woman who had introduced herself to Daria as Conrad's executive assistant was named Bronwyn Vale. Daria had met her exactly once at the Folktale Capital Partners summer function 2 years ago. She was 29 years old, originally from Calgary, and she had the kind of beautiful that looks effortless because enormous effort has been made invisible. Daria had shaken her hand and thought nothing particular about her except that she seemed very composed for someone so young, and then she had forgotten about her entirely. She did not forget about her after she found the second document. This one was on Conrad's phone, which he had left charging on the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning when he went upstairs to shower before his 7 a.m. call. Daria was not the kind of person who went through her husband's phone. She would have said that about herself with complete confidence up until the moment she picked it up because the screen had lit with a message and she saw the name at the top before she had time to decide not to look. The message from Bronwyn Vale said, "Did you move the rest of it yet? He's asking about the timeline." Daria set the phone back on the counter face down. She finished her coffee. She waited until she heard Conrad's footsteps on the stairs, and then she went upstairs herself and sat on the edge of the bathtub in the ensuite and breathed. He's asking about the timeline. He, not she, not we. He. There was someone else involved. She did not confront Conrad. She had almost made that mistake once before, about something smaller. A dinner he had lied about, a trip she later found out had not been for work, and she had learned what happened when she confronted Conrad without proof. She became the problem. She became the one who was paranoid, volatile, ungrateful. She became the reason the conversation had to end. This time she needed to understand what she was looking at before she said a single word. She started with the numbered company. The Crestfall Capital Partners website listed their corporate structure in enough detail that she could identify the subsidiaries, and a search through the provincial business registry took her less than an hour. The numbered company appeared as a shell, registered 18 months ago. The registered agent was a law firm in Mississauga. One of the directors was a man named Harwood Fitch, whom Daria recognized as a board member of Crestfall Capital. The other director was Conrad. She sat with her laptop at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon when the house was empty, and she let that information settle into her. Conrad was a director of a company that had received money from a trust account she had never authorized. That was not an administrative error. That was not a misunderstanding. That required planning. She called the trust's accountant that afternoon, a careful, methodical woman named Rosalind Chi, who had been handling the trust's books since the beginning, and asked her, as casually as she could manage, whether there were any accounts associated with the trust that Daria might not have access to. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Daria, Rosalind said, and the way she said it made Daria's chest go cold. I've been trying to find a way to call you for 3 weeks. What Rosalind had found had taken her those 3 weeks to verify, because she had not wanted to be wrong. She had not wanted to bring something like this to Daria's door without being certain. The trust had a secondary operating account that Daria had never seen. It had been opened 14 months ago using a set of signatures that on examination appeared to be Daria's own. The account had received 17 transfers over those 14 months, totaling just over $2.3 million, drawn from a combination of trust endowment funds and charitable donation receipts. All 17 transfers had been disbursed to the same numbered company, the same company on whose board sat Harwood Fitch and Conrad Whitmore.
Some yes, Rosalind said.
Daria said, I believe so. Can you prove it wasn't me? Another pause. The signature is very close. But the timestamps on 2 of the authorization forms are from dates when I know for a fact you were at the school board summit in Ottawa, because I drove you to the airport. I've still got the texts we exchanged. And there are 3 others where the handwriting on the secondary initials doesn't match yours. I've been documenting everything. Daria looked at her kitchen. Her very expensive kitchen in her very large house on a very quiet street, all of it built on a version of her life that she was only now understanding. Who else knows? She asked. Just me, Rosalind said. I haven't spoken to anyone. Daria, if someone reports this before you do, they will report it as your fraud. She went to see a lawyer that Thursday. Not the family lawyer, who was also Conrad's lawyer and had been for 15 years. She found someone on her own, a woman who ran a small, highly regarded firm in the Annex, specializing in financial fraud and civil litigation. Her name was Adieze, which was on the excluded list, so call her by her first name variant. The lawyer's name was Petra. No, both excluded. The lawyer's name was Claudine Beaumont Ferris, 47 years old, and she had a way of listening to a person that made them feel that everything they said was being filed in exactly the right place. Daria laid out everything she had. The wire transfer document, the screenshots she had taken of the provincial registry records, the notes from her conversation with Rosalind, the text she had read on Conrad's phone, which she had photographed before she put it face down on the counter. Claudine read through all of it, without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. How long have you been managing the trust? She asked. 11 years, Daria said. Since before it was incorporated, I built it. And your name is on the founding documents as director. As founding director and executive officer. Yes, good, Claudine said. That matters. She set down the papers. Daria, what I'm looking at here is a coordinated misappropriation of charitable funds, using forged authorizations in your name, which means either someone is attempting to frame you for a fraud they committed, or they intend to use the forgery as leverage over you at some point, possibly both. Daria had already understood this. Hearing it stated plainly was still different from understanding it. My husband is on the board of the company receiving the money, she said. I know, Claudine said. I read it. A pause. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Did you have any knowledge of or participation in any of these transactions? No, Daria said. Nah. Claudine nodded once, the kind of nod that suggested she had already known the answer but needed it on record. Then here is what we are going to do. The next 6 weeks were the quietest Daria had ever lived through. She went to the trust's offices every morning. She ran her meetings and answered her emails and spoke at a fundraising lunch in Oakville that went well by every external measure. She came home to the house in Rosedale and cooked dinner and sat across the table from Conrad and was, she would have said, perfectly ordinary. She was not perfectly ordinary. She was building a case. Rosalind had pulled together a complete transaction record, cross-referencing the fraudulent account against the trust's legitimate books. Claudine had engaged a forensic accountant who specialized in signature verification, and his preliminary findings were that the authorization signatures showed micro-inconsistencies consistent with traced or copied forgeries. The accountant had also identified something Daria herself had not thought to look for. The IP addresses associated with the online banking authorizations traced back to a device registered to Crestfall Capital Partners. Conrad had used his own office network. Claudine called her on a Tuesday morning with that piece of information, and Daria sat in her car in the trust parking lot for 10 minutes before she felt ready to go inside. She had also quietly begun going through the trust's donor records. It was her job to know the donors. She had always known them. But she looked now with different eyes, and what she found in the mid-level donation records for the previous 18 months was a pattern she could only see because she knew the trust's donor history intimately. 11 donors whose names she did not recognize, each giving amounts between $12,000 and $40,000, none of whom appeared in any of the community outreach records, none of whom had attended any trust events, and all 11 of whom had addresses that traced back to the same postal code in Etobicoke. She brought that to Claudine. Pass-through donations, Claudine said. Clean money in, dirty money authorized out. The charitable donation structure makes the trail harder to follow. She paused. This is not small. Whoever planned this understood corporate financial architecture. My husband has been in capital management for 18 years, Daria said. Yes, Claudine said. I know. The thing Daria had not spoken about yet, not to Claudine, not to Rosalind, not to anyone, was the envelope. She had found it in early December, 2 weeks after the dining room incident, when she was reorganizing the document storage in the trust's administrative office. It was in a locked cabinet she had not opened in several years, because it contained archival records from the trust's early period, board minutes and correspondence from the first 3 years of operation. The envelope was at the back of the bottom drawer, unmarked, sealed. Inside was a letter from Conrad's grandmother, Edith Whitmore, dated 6 weeks before she died. Daria had never met Edith Whitmore. She had been dead for 4 years by the time Daria came into the family. What Daria knew of her had been assembled from other people's recollections: a formidable woman, a shrewd investor, the person who had built the Whitmore family's wealth over 40 years of careful, unglamorous work. The charitable endowment had been Edith's final project, and the instruction she had left was that it be managed by someone with genuine commitment to its purpose, not family interest. The letter was addressed to the trust's founding solicitor, and it contained a provision that had never been incorporated into the trust's public documents. Edith had maintained a separate holding structure, a numbered company of her own, predating the trust, which held the original endowment assets. The trust's public endowment was a distribution vehicle. The actual underlying capital lived somewhere else, and the condition for access to that capital was specific. It could only be dissolved or distributed by the founding director of the Whitmore Family Trust. Daria was the founding director. At the bottom of the letter, in Edith's handwriting, I did not leave this to my family. I left it to the person who would do right by it. I expect she will know when it matters. Daria had read that line 4 times. Then she had put the letter back in the envelope, put the envelope in her bag, and driven directly to Claudine's office without calling ahead. What happened in the 3 weeks after that moved fast enough that Daria, later, could only reconstruct it in segments. Claudine's team had contacted the provincial financial regulator's office, presenting the full fraud documentation with a formal request to open an investigation. Because the matter involved a registered charitable organization, it moved to the Charitable Property Division, which had authority over precisely this kind of misappropriation. Claudine had also, on Daria's instruction, sent a letter to Crestfall Capital Partners Board of Directors, not to Conrad, to the board, flagging a potential conflict of interest involving a senior officer and requesting an emergency review. What they had not anticipated was how fast Conrad moved when he understood something was happening. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Thursday in January. 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit of the Ontario Provincial Police. They were at the front door of the house in Rosedale, and they were asking for Daria Lennox Whitmore. Mrs. Farrow had answered the door before Daria reached the stairs. Conrad was standing in the hallway already, fully dressed, with a look on his face that she had seen exactly once before, at his mother's funeral when he had given a eulogy that made people cry, and she had watched him and understood, for the first time, that he was reading from notes he had memorized rather than feeling anything. "Daria," he said, "you should probably call a lawyer." She looked at him for a long moment. "I have one," she said. She walked to the door. The charges they had come to advise her of were misappropriation of charitable funds and fraudulent misrepresentation. Conrad had filed a report. His version of events placed Daria at the center of the entire scheme: the account, the authorizations, the numbered company. In his version, he had discovered it himself and had in good conscience brought it forward. Claudine was at the OPP Financial Crimes Office within 4 hours. What followed was a process that Daria would not have been able to navigate without Rosalind's records, without the forensic accountant's signature analysis, without the IP trace, without the 11 pass-through donors, and without Edith Whitmore's letter sitting in a secure document storage facility in Claudine's name. The investigation did not go the way Conrad had intended. The IP records from Crestfall Capital Partners were subpoenaed. The device logs showed that the online banking authorizations had been made from a workstation assigned to Bronwyn Vale, Conrad's executive assistant, using credentials that had been created without Daria's knowledge. Bronwyn Vale, when interviewed, did not hold up well under examination. She had believed, she said, that what she was doing was authorized. She had been told it was a restructuring of the trust's internal accounts and that Daria had already approved it. She had the emails. The emails were from Conrad. Harwood Fitch, the Crestfall board member who was co-director of the numbered company, retained his own counsel within 48 hours of the board's emergency review. His counsel apparently advised him that cooperation was his best available option. The Crestfall Capital Partners Board placed Conrad on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The notice went out on a Wednesday afternoon. Daria read it on her phone sitting in Claudine's office waiting room, and she felt something she could not quite name. Not satisfaction, not relief, something quieter than either. There was a meeting in early February at the offices of a trust and estates firm in downtown Toronto that Daria had not known existed until Claudine placed a document in front of her. The firm had been administering Edith Whitmore's holding structure for 22 years. The total value of the assets held was something Daria had not expected, even after she had found the letter. She had understood there was capital. She had not understood the scale of it. The original endowment assets, compounded over 40 years of Edith's conservative and precise management, had grown to a value of just over $280 million. The firm's senior partner, a quiet man in his 60s named Douglas Crane. Douglas was on the excluded list, but Crane was not the character. Crane was just the surname, first name. Raymond, which also excluded. The firm's senior partner, a man named Gideon Marsh, explained to Daria that as founding director of the Whitmore Family Trust she was, per the terms of Edith's holding structure, the sole person with authority over those assets. Conrad, as Whitmore family member, had no claim. The structure had been designed specifically to prevent that. Daria sat across from Gideon Marsh and his associate, and Claudine and Rosalind, who had come as a moral witness more than anything else, and she asked a question. "Did Conrad know about this?" she asked. "The holding structure, did he know what was in it?" Gideon Marsh was quiet for a moment. "There is a record of an inquiry made to this office approximately 4 years ago," he said carefully, "by a representative of Conrad Whitmore, asking about the terms of his grandmother's estate. The inquiry was declined on grounds of confidentiality. But yes, he would have had reason to believe there was something here." Daria nodded slowly. She thought about the numbered company, opened 14 months ago. She thought about 18 months of pass-through donations and forged signatures. She thought about the folder hitting the dining room table and Conrad's face in the hallway on a January morning. He had known he had been trying to get control of the trust, her trust, in order to get access to what was behind it, and he had put her name on it. Conrad's lawyers made a settlement offer in March. It was structured as a mutual agreement, no public statement of wrongdoing, a dissolution of the marriage under specific financial terms, Daria to retain directorship of the trust in exchange for a commitment not to pursue civil action against Conrad personally. Claudine read it through with her and then set it down on the table. "This is a very generous offer," Claudine said, in a tone that made clear she did not mean generous. She meant frightened. Conrad was frightened. "I know," Daria said. "You're within your rights to take it. It would be clean." "I know that too." She looked at the offer for a long time. She thought about what clean meant. Clean meant Conrad walking away from this with a financial penalty and a divorce he could explain however he liked. Clean meant Bronwyn Vale, who had genuinely not understood what she was participating in, bearing more consequence than the man who had designed the entire thing. Clean meant 11 donors in Etobicoke, who had been used as instruments in a fraud scheme and would never know it. Clean meant the trust continuing with the shadow of the last 2 years never fully examined. "I'm not taking it," Daria said. Claudine did not look surprised. "Then we proceed to the regulatory findings and the civil filing." "Yes, it will be public." "Yes," Daria said. "I know. The regulatory findings were released in April. The Provincial Charitable Property Officer's report documented, in 46 pages, the misappropriation of trust funds, the fraudulent authorization scheme, and the use of the trust's charitable donation structure as a pass-through mechanism. It named Conrad Whitmore and Harwood Fitch as the primary architects. It cleared Daria Lennox Whitmore of any involvement. The OPP Financial Crimes Unit laid charges the following week. Conrad was charged with fraud over $5,000, breach of fiduciary duty, and forgery. Harwood Fitch was charged on parallel counts. Both retained criminal defense counsel. Crestfall Capital Partners announced, in a brief statement the same week, the permanent termination of Conrad Whitmore's position as Chief Operating Officer. Daria read that statement at her desk in the Trust's offices on a Thursday afternoon. The same desk she had sat at for 11 years, in the same building she had spent 4 years building into something that worked. Outside the window, the last of the winter was finally releasing its grip on the city. That particular Toronto light of early April, slanted and silver and quietly hopeful after a long season of grey. Mrs. Farrow had left the house in Rosedale 2 months ago, at Daria's gentle insistence, with a year's severance and a letter of reference that Daria had written with genuine care. The house itself was in the process of being listed. Daria did not want it. She had never really wanted it. She understood that now. She had wanted something to fill it with, and what she had filled it with had been her own work, not a life with Conrad Whitmore. She had signed a lease on an apartment in the Distillery District. Small by comparison, high-ceilinged with old brick walls and enough light in the mornings that she was waking up differently. She did not know quite what to call the feeling. She had tried a few words for it. Lighter, cleaner, true. Rosalind Chee brought coffee to the Trust's offices the morning after the charges were announced, and she sat across from Daria, and they did not talk about any of it for a while, because there was something comfortable in not talking about it, in just sitting with the fact that it was over. "I keep thinking about the letter," Rosalind said finally. "Edith's letter." Daria nodded. "I expect she will know when it matters," Rosalind said. "I keep thinking about that. Do you think she had someone specific in mind when she wrote it?" "I don't know," Daria said, honestly. "I never met her. Still." Rosalind wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She built the whole thing on the assumption that the right person would find it. Daria thought about a woman she had never met, 40 years of careful work, a letter in a locked cabinet in a room full of old files. She thought about looking for an insurance document and sitting down on a mudroom floor. She thought about all the ways a thing can stay hidden until it is ready to be known. She built it on the assumption, Daria said slowly, that the right person would look. She had been that person, not because she was exceptional or destined or prepared. Because she had been paying attention. Because she had built something she believed in and refused to let it be taken from her. Outside, April was doing what April in Toronto always does, changing its mind every 20 minutes, sun and cloud, and the distant possibility of rain, the kind of day that cannot quite commit to what it wants to be. Daria drank her coffee and looked out the window and felt, for the first time in 11 years, that she was sitting exactly where she was supposed to be.